are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to week 5 of Cloud Models, Architecture and Risk Management. My name's Peter White, and I'll be taking you through the lecture tonight. I'm just waiting for a few more seconds for the recording to get started, so we'll just give it a second or two more, and then we'll get underway. Okay. What we're going to look at tonight is probably the most contentious part of the cloud, risk management. This is an area that defies real technical precision. We've got to look at trying to define risk. We've got to look at the considerations. We've got to look at the policies that your organisation might have, the risk appetite of them. We look at the risk management frameworks that are available for you to work at and work with. And then finally we might look at, do we roll our own? Do we take the information that's available there and really roll this framework to suit ourselves and just ourselves? And maybe that's the answer. I don't know. Let's have a look at it. So let's define risk management first. Now, Hubbard, from his book, The Failure of Risk Management, defines risk management as the identification, assessment, and prioritisation of risk, followed by the coordinated and economical application of resources to minimise, monitor, and control the probability and/or the impact of unfortunate events. He summed it up as saying, being smart about taking chances. Okay, so ultimately risk management is looking at what we're going to do and taking on-premise IT resources and saying we're now going to put these in the cloud, or we're going to start a new service in the cloud on infrastructure controlled by somebody else, perhaps on a platform that's on infrastructure controlled by somebody else and the platform's controlled by somebody else, or using software that's controlled by somebody else that lives on infrastructure controlled by someone else. So how do we stand in relation to that, and is that risky for us, or is that giving us an acceptable level of risk? So tonight's lecture looks at this and says, okay, how do we define this? How do we assess this? How do we make a decision to go forward? So the approach we can use is this. It's a process where we examine our plans to assess the risk they cause, and that happens at point A there on the top of the diagram. Right? We design some actions to reduce that risk, so going around to the right, point B is where we design actions. We plan to reduce the risk. We then implement that plan, the risk reduction, the control interventions at point C. We evaluate how effective they are, point D, and then we determine the lessons from that plan and any future actions. And that takes us back again to reassessing the entire risk assessment. And so the risk assessment is not just a once only, been there, done that, tick the box, put it away, it's finished. The risk assessment is something we do on a continual basis. And we do this based on the operations that we conduct, how we see things occurring, the information that we get from trade magazines, from outages that occurred, from various other sources of information, and they feed into the risk assessment. And you might say, okay, we're going to do this perhaps once a year, and we'll reassess things when we're coming up to the stage of renewing our subscriptions. But if things start to occur, you might want to assess this more often. And so you've got the idea that this whole process, this risk management process, is one of iteration. You're going to do it continually, and you will use your last risk assessment to branch into the next one and be the basis of that. So it's not just about assessing the risk, because what we've also got to do is we've got to have some policies on what's the level of acceptable risk. Right? How much risk are we as an organisation prepared to accept? And then we've got to look at the controls that we're going to implement to minimise that risk. And so we also need some policy there based on what the organisation is prepared to do to minimise, what are we going to implement to minimise that risk? But it all hinges on there being communication. So we need to if we've made a risk assessment about, the state of risk of, for example, using Office 365, then we need to communicate that risk assessment to other people in the organisation who are going to be using it. And so that becomes part of the process. It's not just the risk assessment which lives in isolation with perhaps a risk assessment team or the security team. It lives with the business. It lives and is communicated and documented throughout the business so that everybody who needs to know about it does know about it. So you can't afford to forget about the communication. So we can look at frameworks, and there's a cloud risk management framework, and this particular framework, which was one developed by Earl, uses a methodology that's very systematic in approach, and it's adaptable. So it's got three major activities in it. You start with a risk assessment, and the risk assessment starts always with a business impact analysis, because risk assessment is not just about technical things, whether or not you've got SSL in place, whether or not you're using multi-factor authentication. It depends entirely on the impact it will have on the business, because after all, this is what ICT's main function is there for, is to support the business and its operations. Having done that business impact analysis, we can then move on to do a cloud information security analysis, and we can look, based on our business impact analysis, at various aspects of the cloud and the information security of it, and do a proper analysis around that. We then look at the next major activity of risk treatment. So now we look at, based on the impact of the business impact and the cloud information security analysis, we can say this is probably the correct ecosystem we're going to use. It's probably infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service, or software as a service. But we assess which one we want to use. We assess the different options that we get. If we're looking at a document, office productivity, an email type operation, we'd assess Office 365 versus Google Docs, Gmail, and see which one gives us the better options out of that, which one satisfies our business impact analysis best, which one is the closest to fitting in our information security analysis, or we can put various different controls in it in order to make it acceptable and reduce our risk to a level that we're happy with. And so the final step then is that risk control step, where we select the provider, we draft the SLA as we looked at last week, and we get that negotiated with them, and then we migrate to the service, implement and monitor our security controls. So that's basically the process. It's a little bit more complex than that, but let's stop there, James. Has anybody got any questions at this stage before we start to move on? And we'll start to look then at the various different parts that make up this risk management framework.
No questions yet.
Okay, let's charge on then. So let's look at the risk assessment. There are two main activities here. Classify the system you're going to migrate to the cloud, identify the security requirements. Now, I'm saying migrate a system to the cloud, but it might be a new system you want to start in the cloud, either or. So here you do a business impact analysis, because this is the best method to determine the risks to the business itself. It's their information, their service that you're putting up there. We need to know how it will impact the business. We need to look at the security requirements, and again we'll do an information security assessment here. So with these two steps together, we identify and link both the business and the information security risks that we're going to face in the migration. Right? So in step one, our business impact analysis, we look at these sort of things. We look at what are the critical business activities. Have we got a description of it? Do we know what's in scope for that activity? Do we know the business priority? Is it a line of business item, so it's critical to the business? Or is it something like office productivity, which, if we lost it for a day, may or may not be a big issue? What's the impact of loss? And can we describe that in terms of financial cost, or describe it in terms of staffing or loss of reputation? And I've got an example at the end here where I'll show you how we looked at, how one business impact analysis and the consequence list that I drew up, which will give you an idea. We look at things like the RTO, the recovery time objective, that critical period to restore a process or service before the unacceptable losses to the business start to occur. we look at a severity rating for the loss, and we look at some probability of the loss occurring. Now, this is all done with business analysts, with the business owners, the senior managers of that particular business unit, some senior IT staff, architects and so on, who will sit down and literally discuss it, right? But it's got to be driven by the business, because these are the guys who know how this works from a business point of view. And so you need to do this for each particular activity. So if you're looking at, let's use the office productivity thing, you'd have to do it for email, because that's one activity you're putting up. You'd have to do it for documentation. So you're looking at, writing documents, Word-type documents or, whatever. You would have to look at anything else you're using. Are you using some, small databases? So, you might be getting off Access and going to, Base or something like that. So are we going to use that? What's the activity there? And what's the issues around it? So for each activity in there, you'd go through that and figure it out. From that, you come up with a risk rating. And these are a couple of different risk ratings here. And a risk rating is basically the product of the severity and the probability. Okay? And this determines should it proceed, or if it's going to proceed, the level of control that needs to be put around it. So we can see here in the second one, the likelihood rating there, we run from almost certain through likely to moderate to unlikely or to rare. And coming across the top, the consequence rating could be insignificant, minor, moderate, major, catastrophic. Now in this one, they've given it numerical values, and so you can then start to put some metrics around it as well if you want. You don't need to. You can just rate it as high, moderate, low. It's a simple way of doing it. But if you've got an almost certain likelihood to occur, but an insignificant consequence, that would rate as a moderate risk. Okay, but if it's likely to occur, an insignificant consequence, again, a moderate risk. If it's moderately likely to occur but insignificant, it now drops to low. Right? And so on. And so you can start to look at that. But if it's almost certain to occur and it's catastrophic, this is high. This is something that you would look at this and say, well, if it's this, it's in this corner of the graph, the top right quadrant, I don't think we want to be in this place. Right? And to me, as an architect, looking at that, I would be saying to my business managers and my executive, anything in that top right quadrant, I would be saying, let's not go there. Right? I would probably be accepting a moderate consequence that's almost certain to occur, possibly just accept that. I could possibly accept catastrophic consequence that's unlikely to occur, but that's kind of where I'd be bounding. We'd be looking at different bounds. And this depends on your own or your organisation's own particular risk appetite. And so you need to be aware, and that needs to come out as a policy so that you are aware precisely how much risk is the organisation prepared to accept. So the second step then is the security, excuse me, get the tongue working, the security assessment. And Ram Gavin, and I'll put the reference down there, he suggests that the major information security requirements for the Cloud Centre around identification, authentication, authorization, confidentiality, integrity, non-repudiation, and availability. So in other words, some of the major parts that fall out of the security assessments. But he thinks they should also include things like governance and transparency. So if we look at these sorts of things, we start to ask the questions, how are users provisioned into the system? Right? Do we have to set up username and password for everybody? Or are they provisioned into the system on the basis that you're joining your LDAP directory, your internal LDAP directory, and linking it, doing a federation system to the cloud? And if that's the case, how are you doing that? Are you doing it through a SAML token or what? So you need to think about how does that actually happen? How do the users get provisioned in? And consequently, how do users who leave get provisioned out? So you also need to think about how a user is authenticated. Are you going to use something like multi-factor authentication? And is it available from the provider so that you can use it? And do you have to use hard tokens or soft tokens? What's the methods that you can use here? So these are the sort of assessments that you would need to know around this, and so you could start to make value judgments around it. From an authorization level, you would need to look at things like, are there different levels of access user required for your particular service? What groups of users require these levels? So again, you'd be looking at your LDAP's directories service and looking at how you've got that set up. And then you'd be looking at the provider or the providers you're considering to say, can I set up similar group access here and maintain it? Or if my system is going to be provisioned and users are going to be provisioned in using the SAML through some sort of federation, can the group access that I've currently got set up be migrated into the cloud so that it can also maintain that set of authorization levels that you've already created, and so that you don't have to go and redo them all again from scratch in a new environment. So these are again questions that you need to ask and look at. So you've got some security questions there that then start to spring out some technical questions that your tech guys, your sysadmins, would want to go away and start talking to, whoever it was, Google or AWS or Azure or Oracle or whichever the provider was, in order to determine precisely how do I do this technically, as opposed to, from your point of view, trying to figure out the security assessment here and what needs to be controlled. You would need to look at confidentiality. Are our users' profiles secure? So if I set up users in the cloud, their profile has got to be secure. So how is it secure? Do you know how it's secure? Can it be protected? What's the story? You've got to ask. Is the data sensitive? So if you're putting up their sensitive data, or is it publicly available data? So for example, let's say you're putting up PII data, personally identifiable information. So this is stuff that is confidential to users or to customers. So you don't want to release that, because these days the Privacy Act will be all over you like a rash. So you need to ensure that this sort of stuff is protected. So how are you going to do that? What would be the impact of the loss of that data? What would be the impact of the public release of that data if you drove to work the next day, got off the train, and suddenly found it splashed all over the front page of your local paper? That your organisation has lost all the personally identifiable information for all of your users and all of your customers. You also need to consider, are there legislative or regulatory restrictions around the data? And if there are, what are they? And how do they affect what you want to do? Does the data need to be homed in Australia? That is, it can't, if it's personally identifiable information, must it be homed in Australia and can't move out of it? You need to look at that, and it depends on the particular data set and any particular legislation or regulatory restrictions that exist around your particular data set. You need to look at the integrity aspects. So this is, where is the data going to be stored? Is it isolated from other tenants' data? How do you know that? Can you prove it? Can they prove it to you? Will the data be encrypted? And it's going to be encrypted in transit, that is between you and the provider, at rest, while it's sitting on the provider's storage, on backup media. So if you're doing a backup within the cloud, and quite often you're doing that, and you might be taking, as I do with some of the stuff we've got set up, taking a snapshot from an S3 storage bin in Sydney and storing it somewhere else in another location. Is that backed up? Is that backup encrypted? So what's the story? If you've just left it there and it's unencrypted, then somebody else, if they can get access to it, can read it. So do you back it up? Do you encrypt it? Where do your backups reside? What about your archive data? Are you going to archive data? Do you have a requirement to archive data, and how long do you need to archive it for? Where is it going to go, and how do you recover it? If I've got data that's sensitive, say the PII data again, if you're now pulling your data out of the cloud, how will the media that contains that data be sanitized at the end of life? End of life of the media, or end of life of your subscription? Does your organisation retain the ownership of the data? Everybody says yes, 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 that's the way it works. Does it actually say that in the SLA? Does it say that in the terms and conditions? Do you really know for sure? You have to go and have a look, right? There's no other way to find out. You've got to go look. Non-repudiation. Do you have any standard e-commerce type stuff that applies here? So you've got all the security protocols and principles that apply to that, and so you'd have to look at using digital signatures, timestamps, confirmation receipts. Okay, for a lot of us this is not going to apply because we're not doing a lot of the e-commerce stuff and putting it in the cloud, but some of you may be, and so you might have that non-repudiation requirement that you've got to look at, and so the PCI implementation has to then come into play, and you're going to get audited every 12 or 18 months, so will it stand up to an audit? And of course you look at it from the point of view of availability. So is this business critical data, or is the functionality, is business critical data or functionality, I'll get my tongue working right tonight, sorry, to be migrated to the cloud. So if this is business critical data or business critical functionality, and you migrate it to the cloud, can you guarantee availability? What's your backup plan for the data? What's your recovery plan for the data? What's your BCP going to do? Your BCP, of course, is your business continuity plan. So your business continuity plan's got to allow for it. What about the provider's BCP? How is that going to affect your recovery plans? You'd need to look at your network connectivity to the provider's network under the headings of things like availability, bandwidth, latency, packet loss. Is it effective? Do you need perhaps another connection in order to provide that redundancy so that you can actually guarantee that availability? Have you figured out what the maximum downtime is that you can tolerate, particularly for business critical data? And it might be shorter than you think, but the only people who can tell you this are the business, right? And so as a result, you've got to talk to the business in some detail about this in order to determine precisely what's going on. And then there's governance. Do we have privacy issues existing for this data that's going to move to the cloud? Do we have compliance issues? What about monitoring? As there's going to be monitoring in the cloud itself, so if you go to Amazon or Azure or Google or Rackspace or whoever, they will provide you certain monitoring. Now, will the monitoring be effective in determining the usage? Will it be effective in determining problems as they come up? So, and of course it boils down to the question then, will moving to the cloud cause issues for the business? So that's another question that you need to talk about to the business. We also need to look at transparency, and this now looks at the provider side. Does their SLA indicate exactly what service is going to be delivered? Are you really sure? Does it indicate what the performance guarantees and KPIs are? Does it indicate what the tracking and reporting mechanisms and situations are? Does it talk, about problem management and how you manage those problems? How you resolve them if a problem does come up? Does it talk about legal compliance issues? And does it talk about security responsibilities? And remember back to where we talked, I think it was about lesson 2, lecture 2, where we talked about the shared responsibility boundary. Can you identify that? Have you really got it figured out in your own mind where the provider's responsibility stops and yours starts? And perhaps you need at this stage to go back and review that security responsibility, that shared responsibility boundary. James, this is a good spot to stop. Let's stop and see if anybody's got any questions before we go on and start looking at risk.
Great. Yep, we've got a few questions here. Probably a few too many, but I'll try to pick out a few, guys. Sherry's just asked, how will the business know if moving to the cloud will cause issues?
I don't know. It's really around this whole risk management process, and that's how you do it. These are all the questions that you've got to start to sit down and ask. And the whole idea of this lecture tonight is to prepare you to start asking those questions, right? Because realistically, to give you an example, for our organisation, I moved a brand new service into the cloud on AWS about 3 or 4 months ago. Now, prior to that, we sat down, we talked to the business, we discussed all of this stuff to see if the business was happy that this would be a suitable risk. The business was. So we wrote up our risk assessment, we wrote up our security assessment, and we proceeded on the basis of that. Okay? So, but I drew up the workshop based on all of these things I'm telling you tonight. And in fact, as a result of that workshop, added a couple of other things that normally aren't in the books and so on. So that's how you take that process. I would suggest a workshop. You've got to look at the fairly senior people in it, in the business, possibly some of the executive team, but certainly the managers of the business unit, and then you go through this thing and start to really talk about how is it going to work? How do they see the risk? Does that help?
Yeah, totally. Thanks. Devendra's just asked, in using governance and transparency as equivalent to the more fundamental CIA risks, aren't we opening the door for some perception judgments to come too much into the vogue?
Well, we've got the CIA risks in there. We've already looked at confidentiality, we looked at integrity, we looked at availability. These are in addition to the CIA triad, where we're looking now at governance and transparency. And transparency, we're looking around the issues of what are we getting from the SLA? Is it going to be completely transparent for what we want? And from a governance point of view, what we're saying, I'll just go back there, from our point of view, what are the issues that exist around the data? Have we got privacy issues? Have we got compliance issues? Can we monitor all this? Right? So this is all in addition to the CIA, which we've already covered in that. Does that answer the question, James?
Yep, totally. I just got one from Wendy here. Surely all of these aspects, InfoSec, BIA, BCP, etc., need to be considered even if we are not moving the data to the cloud?
Oh, of course. I mean, and this should be done on a regular basis. I mean, our organisation is certified ISO 27001, so we do this annually, and we go through things. I mean, and it is a hassle getting the business involved in it, because a lot of them see that as initially, oh, it's pain. Why do we have to do this again? We did this last year. But once you start going through it with them and start to reassess and look at the changes that have been made in the organisation, changes that have been made in the environment, now looking at, and somebody will say, oh, why don't we just move that to the cloud? And then you start that question running, right? And then at the end of it, what you find is people say, wow, this was really valuable. I'm glad we did this. But yeah, you need to do it at least annually, at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have time for probably two more, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Glenn's just asked, when considering moving a system to the cloud, wouldn't it be useful to compare the risk associated with the proposed system against the risk associated with maintaining a non-cloud system?
Yes, quite possibly. I mean, the general process that we've worked with, and one that I've worked with too, is comparing the risk for the service. And we've generally looked at it then, we do our ISO 27001 risk assessment each year, and that looks at generally the on-premise risk. So when you do then a cloud risk, you've got the other risk treatment plan that you've already created that you can go back and look at and see what the difference is. And there is usually a considerable difference. I mean, in the moving to the cloud, you start looking at things that you would normally not look at. You would normally not consider, do I need to encrypt my data at rest? Do I need to encrypt my data between endpoints within the organisation's, secure firewall network? Now suddenly you're taking it a bit further, because you're now at the stage where you're actually moving your business data, your business functions outside of your secure perimeter. And so as a result, the risk changes, and it changes fairly dramatically. And then now it's up to you to decide, how do I assess that risk? How do I treat that risk? How do I, at the end of it, when I've got a risk treatment in place, and I look at now the residual risk, is that acceptable to me as an organisation to run with in the context of this particular business service? So that's where I would look at it. I mean, some other risk managers might look at it somewhat differently, but I mean, that's the way I would look at it, because in our organisation we're running an ISO 27001 risk assessment every year anyway. So we've got the internal risks sorted. So now if we want to compare it, they're there. We don't have to do it again. So maybe that's something everybody might want to consider, that, you know, compare it with an internal risk assessment and show the business that and say, well, you know, are you happy with this? Not a bad idea, actually, Glenn.
Yeah, that sounds good. One more question from Craig. Uncertainty cannot be measured, right? What risk models are useful to measuring cloud risk in a risk assessment matrix?
Well, I think Douglas Hubbard would not agree with you that uncertainty can't be measured, because it can be measured in terms of probability. So, and I would recommend, if you want to explore this any further, to read Douglas Hubbard's book. Hang on, just look at it's The Failure of Risk Management. So if you want, I'll put the details up on the forum so you can find the book and go and read it. A very, very interesting book, and it talks about how do you quantify risk.
That sounds great.
It is quite interesting. It does get a little technical at times, but not terribly, and you don't need a huge amount of maths to understand it. You know, basic addition and multiplication will nail it. So you don't need to run calculus to calculate risk. So I'll put the details up on the web, on the forum tomorrow. But that's where I would go with it. You can look at the level of uncertainty, and what we're doing here by involving the managers, by involving the executive, and possibly involving some of your technical team, is that you are getting a balanced risk assessment. You're getting people who are coming at looking at it from different viewpoints, and you are averaging out a risk assessment. And so to a degree, and to a fairly large degree, that averages that out and removes a lot of the uncertainty. I think you'll find once you start to do this that the uncertainty can disappear to a very large degree. You come up with a probability factor that you think, you know, this is going to work reasonably well and I'm reasonably happy with it. And so that level of confidence that you have in your assessment, I think after a while you'd say, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that level of assessment and that level of confidence. So I'd recommend some reading on that one, but it's quite an interesting read.
Yeah, hopefully it would really demystify things.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you know, he puts the process down to talk about precisely how to quantify this normally very subjective process. So I'll put the details up on the forum.
Great, thanks, Peter.
All right, shall we move on?
Yep, let's go for it.
Okay. Righto, guys. So the next thing we now start to look at is the risk treatment. So you select the ecosystem that you want to use: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. Pick what you want to use, how you're going to use it, have that decided. Right? And now you start to look at the providers. What are the options they've got that allows you to fit that particular service into your assessment? Which one fits better? Can you identify the security controls that you're going to need to implement in the cloud, but also in your own organisational environment? For example, you know, if we take the Office 365 Google Docs thing. Okay, in the cloud, we might want to set up some groups so that people get access to certain different things, and it might be some email groups so people can get different levels of access to email or get different types of email assigned to them. So that's fine. But from your organisational point of view, how are you going to contact that? Are you going to just, you know, straight across the net, HTTPS, or are you going to set up a VPN between your organisation and the Google Cloud or the Azure Cloud so that you can get to it? So, you know, and they're options that you can have. So you can set up a VPN from within your organisation which securely connects any traffic going out of your firewall to Google or Azure in order to encrypt all that traffic in transit. So you need to understand that. You need to know which way you're going to go. You need to know, and that's just one small example of how you would do that. You need to clearly identify and document the shared responsibility boundary between you and your provider, right? And I recommend you document, not just identify, because people have this habit of saying, oh, it's in the cloud, therefore I don't have to do anything. It's not my problem. It's Microsoft problem or AWS problem or Google's problem. Sorry, it's still part of your problem. They might be looking after the infrastructure in an IaaS instance, but from the OS up, it's yours. It's your baby, and you've got to look after it. So you need to know where that shared responsibility boundary starts. You have to have it documented, because if any of your sysadmins or help desk or even your users say, look, this shouldn't have happened, you can refer to that and say, okay, which side of the boundary does it fall? And therefore have I got to fix it, or do I go back to AWS or Azure or Google or whoever in order to get the thing fixed? You need to know that. And that does form part of your risk treatment, because that's another area where you're deciding where you're putting controls, etc. in place. What are the services you're going to use from that provider? Have you got an SLA set up with them? And if not, are you just going to accept the standard SLA they give you, or are you going to go and negotiate something? And I would suggest that if you're looking at moving an organisation, for example, all your organisation to Office 365 or Google Docs or whatever, that, you would go and negotiate an SLA, because you would probably end up with a better deal. You would also end up with a better deal on services, right? And you need to negotiate that. So you go and have that discussion with whoever the sales rep is from Azure or AWS or Google or whoever, right? And then from there, once you've got the SLA set up, then you can start to set up and configure your selected services. I mean, it might be just something as simple as organising a monthly account, which is what we did with AWS, and said, well, rather than pay with a credit card, we want to set up a monthly account, and we want certain things provided to us as part of that monthly account, so we can charge back to the business units those particular services. And so as a result, we negotiated that with AWS. That's now in our SLA, and it just works. Okay? And so there's things like this that you would negotiate. You need to think about, what are the things I need to do? Once you've got the negotiation finished and your SLA in place, now you can go and set up your services. You can set up the EC2 instances or the PWS instances or the SWS instances that you want. You configure and implement the security controls, and you are now ready for operation. But before you start, you need to set up your monitoring. So what monitoring are you going to do for usage and operational issues? What monitoring are you going to do for security posture, to ensure that the security posture is being maintained and is correct? How are you going to check that the provider is meeting the SLA conditions? And how are you going to check that the provider's security posture is being maintained? And those monitoring questions all come back into that negotiation with the SLA. And because they are the questions you ask your provider and say, how are you going to do this? How am I going to monitor this? How am I going to monitor that the security posture is right? How am I going to monitor that you're actually doing what you say you're going to do? And how do I know that you're maintaining your security posture? And they are used to this conversation and will talk to you about it and give you things to do that you will be able to set up so that you can do this monitoring. But you need to have the conversation, right? So having got all this done, this now leads you to the risk management plan. Okay, so this is where you start to work. Now, this is a risk management plan that I've drawn up, right? So this is my own, and this is one actually that I'm doing that is part of a paper I'm in the middle of writing. So what I'm doing with this one is I'm looking at the cloud services here on the basis of threats. So I'm looking at data breach being a threat. And I'm looking at the things that could be threats under a data breach thing. It could be operational data, personally identifiable information, administrative data, security data. So I can now list the different risks, and they would apply to whatever risk you've got for your own particular organisation. I'd look at some of the possible controls, and what I've done here is just thrown in some possible controls: encryption, multi-factor authentication, virtual private networks. Then we'd give it a consequence rating, a likelihood rating, and then finally a rating, and there's a place for comments. Okay, so I do that, and I work through all of the major risks. So I look at data breach, I look at data loss. So again, deletion. What if there's attack that leads to data loss? What if there's equipment failure? The AWS Sydney data center becomes a smoking hole in the ground or something or other. So, how do we get around that? What if his account is hijacked? Stolen credentials, or somebody's stolen the device, but they've been able to hack into the device and get access to the passwords and get onto your administrative console. Oh joy! But what happens? Have you had an eavesdrop attack because somebody's been using it without a VPN? I don't know. So again, we have some possible controls: multi-factor authentication, virtual private networks, virtual private clouds, that is groups within the cloud, role-based access control, audit locking, intrusion detection systems, right? These are the things that you would possibly put in place. The same for insecure interfaces or APIs. And you have issues there around access control, around the interface, around the API, around admin interfaces, and so on. What about a distributed DOS attack? Right, so perhaps you use controls like high availability or a BCP plan or scaling or perhaps whitelisting, or maybe you just shut it down for a bit. I don't know. I mean, this is the various different possible controls that you could possibly use if you're getting attacks against your main interface or your storage location or your DNS. So you would look at each one of these in detail and go through it. Some more here: malicious insiders, both internal and external. How would you handle that? What's the risk? And then some possible controls. Abuse of cloud services. Are people adding on additional services and not letting you know about it? Are they using them for themselves? Somebody might be running, I don't know, some sort of Facebook service and running it off your enterprise plan in AWS, and you're paying for it. Or are they using the service to run up some EC2 instances to go hack some people? So, the only way you're going to tell this is by monitoring and also by usage monitoring, and perhaps by the use of virtual private clouds, that is groups, and again, role-based access control, which only gives certain people rights to create new EC2 instances or create new services. So, and then there's the due diligence. Have you identified the type of service? Have you completed your security assessment? And what's the risk if you don't? Have you done an SLA assessment? Have you identified shared responsibilities? Are the business needs being met by the service? Are the resource needs being met by the service? What are your HA requirements? What if you don't do HA? Is that going to be an issue? Right? So we go on. Have we done a backup plan? Have we done a BCP plan? And have we amended the current one? And when we look at shared technology, what if there's data leakage from one tenant to another? What if there's a cross-platform vulnerability that's discovered? How do we get around that? What's happening with patch management? And that in an IaaS instance is probably going to be our problem, not yours, not theirs. But in PWAS, it's the provider's problem, same as in SWAS. So how does that handle? And how do we handle the constant updates then? Are there issues around authentication or user access or admin consoles? So these are all the different things that we look at. I think I might have skipped over one page. Oh, no, I didn't. Sorry. I just thought I'd missed a page. So these are the different things we look at in the risk management plan. From there, we then start to look at our consequences. And so here's a set of consequences that I've drawn up. So, it's severe. It has a series of impacts. And so I've looked at this on the basis of impacts on business systems and services, impacts on information, impacts on business viability, on compliance, on capability, on reputation, confidence, and relationships. So let's work across the top line and look at the severe stuff. Right? So impact on business systems and services, complete failure of line of business system or service, resulting in significant loss of service for an extended period. Chaos, guys, this is catastrophe stuff. Total, and some metrics around it now. Total loss of operational capacity for greater than 24 hours. Total loss of operational or strategic data sets. Okay, we know what we're talking about now. Right? This is where you would sit down with the executives and your senior managers and you would work out a risk, impact and consequences statement. And this is what I've done here. Right? So this is mine. and I'm sharing it with you. Same with information. What if there is a severe impact on information would be a significant compromise of organisational information with substantial ongoing impact, a significant compromise of publicly identifiable information, a significant and sustained adverse national or international media scrutiny. So now we start to get some idea about it. Impact on viability, significant revenue or opportunity loss or cost increase greater than 20% of budget. Now, budget here could be the budget of the organisation, could be the budget of the project, could be the budget of the business unit. Budget comes into context here, where whatever the particular context of the risk that you're doing. Insufficient operating funds to continue operations over a sustained period. Failure or widespread interruption to key business processes or breakdown of management systems. So all this stuff we're talking about are really critical things. The interesting one at the end, though, reputation, government inquiry or sustained adverse national international media scrutiny, organisational brand severely affected, significant impact on organisational abilities. So this is just impact on the reputation of the organisation. If your reputation is splashed all over the front page of your local newspaper, your local capital city daily, how is that going to affect how your organisation works? And so then we work down the major ones. So major fail rather than a complete fail, major fail of line of business services, partial loss of capacity for greater than 12 and less than 24 hours, major loss or damage to operational or strategic data sets. We come down to moderate and minor. As we see here in moderate, if we just again use the impact on business and services as an indicator, partial loss of operational capacity for greater than 1, less than 4 hours, minor loss or damage to operational or strategic data sets. Okay, so the impact is becoming less. In the minor one, we have a minor failure of some line of business systems or services resulting in delays to service for a short period, minor loss of operational capacity for less than 2 hours, partial loss or damage to some operational data sets. Nothing about strategic data sets now. So, we've come down further. And then finally, insignificant, minor failure of some line of business systems or services, resulting in minor delays to services for a short period. Minor loss or damage to some operational or strategic data sets. And there's our rating scale underneath it, where we look at, rating it also with a numeric indicator, because that then allows me to run some metrics over it in order to determine how we do this. So a really good spot to stop here now, James. We've sort of probably blown everybody's mind with all this. So are there any questions?
Certainly, there's a few here.
I thought there might be some.
Yeah, well, Marco's just asked, do you have an example of a security breach and the impacts and consequences that you can share?
No, I can't, sorry. I actually have a really nice one, but no, I can't, sorry.
That'd probably be a security breach in itself.
It certainly would.
Richard's just said Sony Entertainment. Anthony's just said Target in the US.
Well, look, yes. Okay, guys, yes, sorry, I was thinking of one that relates to us, but you're right. Sony, Target, there's been a number of them that are quite substantial. So, yeah, think of those ones, yep.
So many good examples out there now. And I wonder if I think someone asked this question, is the prevalence of these sort of attacks and examples, do they actually lead to a lesser effect on the reputation loss as time goes on?
Well, I don't know. I mean, how do you guys feel about Sony at the moment? Because that's really how you assess it. Are you prepared to put your details up on the Sony website to play games or download movies or music?
That's a good question. Maybe I could put it in as a GoToWebinar poll for the end of the night.
Yeah, maybe that would be a good one. And so, if using Sony as the example, or Target is another good example, are you prepared to use your customer, loyalty card and put in your credit card details into Target's database so that, if you know that it's possibly going to be attacked, or attacked again. Would you be prepared to do that? So that's probably a really interesting question, and that's the only real question that you could ask around that reputational thing, because it's probably the most difficult to really determine and the one that probably causes the most damage. I mean, if you're here in Sydney or in New South Wales and you get off the train in the morning and you see there's the Daily Telegraph, the Sydney tabloid that says, major data breach in X corporation, and you're working for X corporation, how are you going to feel? And then how is it going to affect the operations of the place in the way things are going to happen from here on in? How are people going to look at you as a member of that and say, well, were you responsible for doing some of this? How are people then going to turn around and say, well, do we trust this organisation to hold our data anymore? That's really the question. And what we're trying to do with this risk assessment process is keep you out of the front page of the local papers, as far as we possibly can. And I mean, you're the guys who have to do this. But to do that, you need to do this risk assessment, the security assessments, and put some thinking into it to ensure that you don't get stuck on the front page of the Daily Telegraph or the Courier Mail or the Herald Sun or whatever. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Marco's just said again, RE Sony, many small and medium customers say it'll never happen to us, I guess, in relation to being in the newspaper, you're less likely.
Yeah, I suppose Sony's the sitting target because they've got so many accounts and so much data, but I mean, realistically, with the hacking tools that are available, people will just, port scan stuff till they find a weakness. If the weakness is on your website and you're, holding personally identifiable information and or credit card details, etc., and they can hack into it, maybe you're there.
Yep.
It's that simple. Just because you're small doesn't mean to say you won't be attacked.
It's true. So Sadria's just asks, and I always like these questions that have a tangible example that relates to us. What is the risk appetite for universities or organisations to move to cloud services? Is it mainly dependent on the criticality of the data?
It's a difficult one, and it depends on who you're talking to. I was having this conversation in a meeting today, and we were talking about the risk appetite of our organisation for moving another service into the cloud. And a couple of the managers there were all gung-ho because they can see that we'll save them some thousands of dollars a year by not having to buy infrastructure and things, and over time, as one of them said, over about 5 years, which was the expected life of this particular program, he thought that perhaps $20,000 to $30,000 could be saved, and he thought that was probably a good thing. Another guy though looked at it and said, well, how much flexibility does it give us? Does it really make it more flexible? Does it make it easier for us to do things? Can we spin something up faster? Can we develop anything quicker and get it out to the public quicker? And he saw that as the critical thing. And so the risk appetite between these two, I thought, was quite substantial. One bloke was looking at, I don't care what the risk is because I can save some money. So he's got quite a large risk appetite because he's just looking at the amount of money he's got to save. The other guy who has a much smaller risk appetite was looking at what can I actually get out of this, right? And is it going to give me any strategic advantage in the long run? And so although his risk appetite was a fair bit smaller because he wasn't prepared to take some of the risk, I thought he had a better approach to it. That, yes, okay, let's cut the risk, the appetite for the risk down. But at the same time, let's take an approach that looks at what can we as an organisation get out of this? Does it give us a strategic advantage? And as we went through this thing, we looked at it and thought, yeah, okay, we possibly might have a strategic advantage here, and so as a result, we're going to investigate that a bit further. So that's where I would see it come from. Universities, yeah, look, universities are a law unto themselves. And their risk appetite is something known only to themselves and the gods. I've not been able to figure out exactly how they come up with a risk appetite in the university, but the organisations that I've worked in have a much more structured approach to it. So I'm not quite sure about the university side of it, but if from a government organisation or a private organisation side, I feel to be on much stronger ground, where I can say that a lot of people are starting to look not so much at the risk, but at the impact of that risk and how it's going to affect the organisation in its strategic approach to its plans and its strategy for the next 4 or 5 years. Does that answer the question? I think I might have rambled a little bit there, just a tad.
No, it absolutely does. I think probably, sorry, I'm just reading some comments, probably a couple more questions before we get on, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Devendra's just asked, what are the ways in which multi-tenancy has occupied the risk assessment process?
It was a fairly major problem right at the start because people didn't quite understand it or have much experience with it, I suppose. We're probably, 5 or 6 years into the current impact of multi-tenancy, or the current model of it, and it seems to be working. It seems to be working quite well. There have been very few that I'm aware of incidents of breaches and breaks in data isolation or client isolation. There have been a couple of cross-platform vulnerabilities identified, particularly at the hypervisor level. However, quite a few of those have been identified at an academic level only, and only going to occur under certain really strict and given conditions, most of which aren't likely to occur in a cloud data center. So, theoretically, there is a risk. Practically, we haven't seen, or I haven't seen any real evidence of it, and I'm prepared to be corrected on that one. But at this stage, I would say the evidence for multi-tenancy is that generally it seems to work. But I'm prepared to go out and do some more research on that in order to back up my gut feeling, and that's basically what it is, a gut feeling based on the lack of anecdotal evidence. So to be really sure, I could honestly say no, I'm not sure, but I'd need to do some research to find out. And if you want to take that up with me afterwards, I'll certainly do that.
Oh, great. Yeah, I think it's multi-tenancy, much like just the lack of control over the physical data and the transport is up there with the security concerns of people moving into cloud.
People are used to running on-premise IT, where you've got control over what's going on. You've got control over where you put things. You've got control over how you allocate disk on a SAN and where you put the various different bits of your storage. Now you haven't. You might be buying an S3 bucket on Amazon, or you might be buying a bucket of storage on Azure, and you're putting some stuff in there, and you are trusting them that it's being kept separate from everything else. Now, academically and logically, you can understand the way in which this is all broken up and divided, because you see how that works within a normal organisation, that you divide up your SAN into various small buckets, and you can allocate those buckets to people, and they can't get from one to the other. And so logically, you understand that the S3 bucket or the Azure bucket is going to be very, very similar. But you can't test it, can you? You can't really test for sure to be sure that's exactly how it does work. And so you have to take it on trust. And so the end result is you are trusting Microsoft or Amazon or Google or Rackspace, whoever is the provider you've gone to ensure that they have implemented their storage correctly, their multi-tenancy correctly, and that it will work correctly in the way which has been implemented and configured. And that's the problem. You have to take that bit on trust.
And someone spoke earlier about risk of local versus cloud rather than just risk of a service on its own. And so you actually have to try to be honest about the risk of your own ability to provide services.
Exactly. I mean, there's no good trying to put a brave face on things and say, oh no, we can do things better than the cloud can do. I mean, nobody running an on-premise IT service has the resources that Amazon can throw at infrastructure, or that Microsoft can throw at infrastructure, or that Rackspace or Google or IBM can throw at infrastructure and the management of it. I mean, I was looking at ZDNet today, and they were talking about the new Rackspace data centre they set up in just outside of London, near one of the airports there, and I think it's only got 150,000 servers in it at the moment. It's not fully kitted out yet, but it's only perhaps a quarter kitted out, and a huge amount of infrastructure and that gone into it. Where do you run 150,000 physical servers and then coordinate them all together in order to produce a cloud? These guys are really putting the work into the infrastructure, so one has to assume and has to trust that they've got their act together properly and that they have properly configured and implemented it. Anecdotally, we use the stuff and it seems to work. Right? I say anecdotally because I haven't actually done any research in it, nor have I seen any research into it, which tests how it's going to work and whether or not you can break it down. So until I see that, it's all anecdotal. But that's where we stand at the moment. It's basically a trust thing. We all use Dropbox or OneDrive or Google Drive. You put all your photos up there and you trust that the next time you go there, they'll be there. Right? You do that on a blind basis that, I bought a new Samsung phone recently, and the minute I logged in, Google was offering to store all my photos on the phone, on the cloud. Well, trust me, it'll work. And yes, it does work. The same as if I bought an iPhone, Apple will be saying save everything in the iCloud. Trust me, it'll work. And it does. Occasionally, as we found with the iCloud, things aren't configured quite well. And so people put up some interesting photos and find they appear in all sorts of different places. But it's a trust thing. We trust that it'll work until we find out it doesn't. Which is why we need to do the risk management and security plan so that we reduce the risk of that actually happening, which means perhaps the stuff you put up there, you encrypt it so that if it does get hacked, then it's of no use to anybody.
Yep.
Does that answer the question, do you think, James? Have we got there with it?
Yeah, certainly. So it's all about balance in the end.
It is.
Marcus said, which is somewhat alongside this, so we were saying earlier about the risk appetite of universities. Mark said several universities are using Google to power things like student email accounts. And I think there's certainly been some hoo-ha along the way about going to a provider like Google as a SaaS provider. And I think it'll probably come under governance and compliance where the data is physically stored. I know one university in particular said that they wouldn't go with Google until they could be assured that their data was stored primarily in Australia.
Well, there's one New South Wales government department has moved all of its email and office productivity stuff to Google. And that happened about 12, 18 months ago. So they've put the whole lot there into Google. So they don't run Exchange anymore. It now runs Gmail, and they use Google Docs as their office productivity suite, all running from the cloud.
Andrew's just asked, would you trust an organisation more or less if they told you that their data had been compromised? I guess that's a question for everyone.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? If they were honest about it, I'd probably be inclined to trust them slightly more than if they were trying to hide it. But no matter what, I'd still be doing my own risk assessment and trying to decide how does my service, what's the risk to my services, what's the risk to my organisation, how is that going to affect, how is this service going to affect my risk posture? So that's the way I'd be looking at it. I'm not so much worried about what they've done, but I'm worried about what the factors are going to have on my organisation and my service. So I would assume that, if they've been hacked, that they would probably, if they really wanted to stay in business, be taking steps to not be hacked again. The same as I would expect with Sony, who would be taking fairly major steps to ensure that it doesn't happen again, or Target. But they are big targets, and so there will be a lot of people trying to get to them, particularly now that they know that they've been caught at least once. So how do you run it? How do you do it? You do the risk management plan. If you're going to keep storing all the credit cards and details, then perhaps you encrypt all those files. Yes, it might make decrypting on the fly a fraction slower, so people might have to wait an extra second or two at a checkout. Is that an issue? I mean, that's part of your risk management and your risk assessment plan, and say, okay, this is the consequence of this. It's going to add for example, a 2-second delay for you on an online checkout to check out and have your purchase approved and for it to move off and be shipped to you. So is that going to cause an issue because of the 2-second delay in encryption on the fly? And it may not be that, depends on where you've got your data and what processing speed you've got under it. But I use that as an example. Is that acceptable? Is it acceptable at 5 seconds? Is it acceptable at 10 seconds? At some stage you would say, no, it's unacceptable, and so then perhaps you find a different solution to the problem. So, and it's like we looked at in the impact and consequences table here. You start looking at some figures around what's acceptable and what's not, which suddenly moves you out of subjective territory into quite objective and quantifiable territory. And so we get back out into the area that Hubbard talked about, trying to get away from the subjective stuff where risk management fails because everybody says, oh, no, it'll be all right. Yeah, there's no great problem there, to physically measuring something, right? And that's where I think the answer is in that one. It's looking at it from the other direction. How does this affect me and my business? Does that answer the question, do you think?
Yeah, spot on. It's very informative. Explores it well. How much you got left in the slides presentation?
All I've got left now is some reading. So here's some reading for you guys. The NIST framework, the Guide to Applying the Risk Management Framework to Federal Information Systems. Granted, it's from 2010, but it is NIST, and it is the National Institute of Standards and Technology from the States, is used as one of the guidelines that a lot of people use. The second one, though, is extremely interesting. This one really relates to New South Wales, the Data Sovereignty and the Cloud, a Board and Executive Officer's Guide, and this comes out of the Uni of New South Wales Faculty of Law. This is a report well worth reading. It is probably a report that you need to drop on your CIO's desk. Amazon Web Services Risk and Compliance is a very interesting one. There's a good video there on risk management basics. If you want to review the basics, that'll run you through it. The things you really should read, if you want to read anything at all, is the Vail, Kalanick, Fair and Lawrence one, which is the Data Sovereignty Guide, and the Amazon Web Services one. Watch the risk management basics, and of course, do the weekly quiz before the final quiz next week. And that's it, James.
Cool. That is just about it. We've got a couple of other things we'll be covering just now, given that it's last week's webinar. First, I'm going to talk to you guys a bit about not only this week's quiz, but the final test next week, which is a 40-question test rather than the 5-question weekly test that we've been doing. We don't have a webinar next week. We just have the exam. You have the whole week in which to do it. After I've talked about that for a minute, we'll have Neil McCosh, who's been on here answering some questions alongside me tonight. And he's going to just answer some questions and talk a bit about our further study with us and master's programs that we offer. So the exam, the test next week, if it's not yet clear to people, the next week, so yeah, there's no webinar class like we're on next week. Rather, at about this time next week, the exam opens up. So it's 40 questions, multiple choice, just like the weekly quizzes. But unlike the weekly quizzes, you can't sit it as many times as you want. You can sit it once, anytime within that week. That's from the 13th to the 20th of May. You get a 1 hour time limit on it. That's for 40 questions. So it's plenty of time to do it. It's an open book test. You're more than welcome to go off and check the readings or Google things while you're doing it, whatever resources you've got at your fingertips. There's a 50% pass mark on that test. If you pass the test, within about a week after the exam closes, we'll send out certificates of achievement to you. We've got CSU and IT Masters logos on it, Martin Hale's signature. It's a good thing to have, a good thing to put attached to your CV. I see some CVs that come in, people put MOOC certificates on the back of them. It's good to show additional learning. Anyone who's done short courses with us before, please note that we're now having the weekly quizzes as prerequisites to this final test. So if you haven't yet jumped on and done the weekly quizzes, especially this week's one, which has just opened up 12 minutes ago at 8 o'clock, get in and get them done before you do the final exam. You need to have done them in addition to doing the final test to be able to qualify for a certificate. And, well, they're just a really good practice to see what the final exam will be like and what using the Learn.IT Masters quiz system is like, so you're familiar and ready and confident. We'll send out an email reminding you that that the exam will be on next week. So, and please don't leave it till the very, very last minute. You wouldn't want an internet outage. We get quite a lot of people every time we run a short course log in at 11 p.m. at night, either get the time zone wrong or get an internet dropout. Unfortunately, you've got a whole week to do the test. Are there any questions about the test, about the exam next week? No, hopefully I've covered that. All right.
While you're
Ask
waiting,
any further questions you got on the forum. Sorry.
so while you're waiting for those questions to come in, James, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending this course and for putting up some really, really interesting questions on the forum. I didn't have a chance to answer any questions today. I had a day of meetings from 8 in the morning until finish of work. Today it was a wonderful, wonderful day. But tomorrow I've got an hour or two free, so I'll get as many answered as I can, and I'll certainly get them answered over the next few days. But I would just like to thank everybody for attending the course. It's been great, and I've enjoyed giving it to you, so I hope you get something out of it. And I certainly would recommend you do these things. I mean, if you're in the Australian Computer Society or something like that, you can claim this sort of stuff as professional development, and so this would give you a good 5 hours of PD towards a certified practitioner certification if you're in the ACS. So another little plug there for the ACS on top of what we're already doing. So James, over to you.
Just a further question about the quizzes. Lucy's asked, is it too late to complete the previous week's quizzes? I forgot to mention that each of the quizzes opens up week by week, but they're all available until the end of the course. So no, you can jump in and do each of the week's quizzes anytime from now up until when you do the final exam as well. And I just want to say thank you as well, Peter. I really like sitting in and helping with the admin questions on short courses because I get to learn content myself. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm a lot more confident in my definitions of cloud computing models and such, so that's great. And thanks to all the great questions that everyone keeps asking.
Yeah, there's been some really interesting questions come up on this course. It's been great.
Yeah. I'm just going to hand over to Neil McCosh now. And he's got just some great information about our courses that you might all be quite interested in hearing.
McCosh, I work for Charles Sturt University and IT Masters. IT Masters is a company that works with the uni marketing the postgraduate IT programs, and we also hire industry professionals to run some of the practical industry subjects on the Masters. Basically worked in education for many years, and in the IT area I was the sales manager at Dimension Data in New South Wales, which I really enjoyed and met a lot of the technical instructors that are around today. Thanks, Peter. I see everyone enjoyed your course. The content on that Peter's short course covered about a third of the cloud computing subject that is on the Masters of Networking and Systems Administration. And you'll see a lot of the subjects on this networking course includes a lot of academic subjects around ethics, internet networking, and also includes industry certification subjects. You'll see on the screen one called ITE 516. That is our hacking countermeasures subject, and that would cover the content of the EC Council ethical hacking certification. So you would study that, do a university assessment, and in that subject we also provide the exam voucher to go and sit that industry certification. There's some ITOL, there's some communication subjects, and quite a range of subjects there. Most of our industry certification subjects, the first one, 514, is around CISP, Exchange is the mail server from Microsoft, virtualization, VMware, CCNA for 526, and 527 is around MCSA Microsoft certifications. So if you haven't got those certifications, you're studying the subject, getting credit for the subject by passing the academic assessments, and then you can go and do the industry certification. If you have those already, you may be able to get credit, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So we have a range of qualifications around networking and systems administration, security masters, a new one that we started this year around mobile applications development, which has really taken off, and the more business type IT courses around management and MBA computing. Each Masters is 12 subjects. You can reduce that with credit, and I'll talk about credit later, how you can get credit on a Masters. And you can also do a graduate certificate first, just to get a feel how you'd go on it, do the 4 subjects, move into the Masters and do the remaining 8, and then be awarded the graduate certificate and the Masters on the way, just to get a feeling for how you go on the course. Or just do one subject, check out how you go, and if it's not what you want, pull out within a month and you won't even be charged for it. But I think Peter's subject will give you a good idea of the academic subjects on the course, whereas the industry subjects probably a little bit more practical, but I think the combination works very well. So 12 subjects on the course. As I mentioned, some prepare you for industry certification, 3 sessions a year. And if you're working, you probably do 1 or 2 subjects a session. Full-time study, if you're not working, would be 4 subjects, but if you're working, as most of our students are, 1 or 2. And each session you decide whether you do 1 or 2 subjects or you take leave that session because you're just too busy. Charles Sturt University, we're Masters at Distance Education. We're Australia's largest postgraduate IT provider of postgraduate study. Very proud of that. So you do study at home. You do this wherever you can during the week. You study where you live. You submit assignments electronically. And up front, you know that when you sign on for a subject, you get your subject outline and you know when the assignments are due, what they are. Sometimes they have a final exam, and there you have to go to a CSU exam centre, and we have them throughout the world. So there'll be one set up just near where you are, and basically you just need a room and a proctor, someone to watch you do the exam. So I'll just see if we've got any questions so far. None yet. That's fine. Just lost my PowerPoint.
Thanks for that, Neil. Just while we wait and see if anyone's got any questions about Neil's presentation in particular, I've had a couple other questions just come in from before that. Alan has asked, do you have a subject on enterprise architecture? I guess that's pretty fitting about the sort of content we're talking about here.
No, this is an area I've been harassing my head of school and course director about for some time, that, ultimately we need an EA course, possibly based around TOGAF, being the open standard. But it's something I argue about every time I see him, and I think he's at the stage now where Professor Altas just sort of looks at me and shudders because he knows what's coming. But I'll keep trying. I definitely want to get one up.
Oh, great. Yeah, actually, I don't know, enterprise architecture, would that be alongside the lines also of sort of the Amazon architecture courses, or is that a different thing?
It's a different thing, and it really covers it. It moves to a more strategic level, and you start to look at how do you put all of your resources available, and what do you do with the infrastructure? How do you bring the infrastructure to bear on the resources that you've got, on the services you want to look at? You start thinking about roadmaps. Where I am right now, where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? What's going to be the infrastructure path for that? Is this current set of technology stacks that I've got going to work for me? Do I want to move to something different? If so, what? Or am I going to start to look for a particular technology stack that does the following over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then sit back and wait and see what pops up, and then rewrite the architecture to suit that? I mean, it's a fascinating place to play, and I enjoy it immensely. And what I am. I'm an enterprise technical architect, so I kind of deal on the more technical side. I've got an enterprise architect who works alongside me who deals on the more strategic side. So I deal with infrastructure and things like AWS and cloud and how we do it. He deals more on the strategic side with the CIO and that, about where are we going, and then they'll come up with these great, brilliant ideas, and I'll bring them back to reality. That's how I see it, anyway.
Yeah, and there's certainly things in the pipeline about architecture coming in. We're going to have another short course. There's a couple that are being planned. One in about, I guess, solutions architecture, and I think another was being planned with Roger Lawrence is from HP. Some of you might know him, the big advocate of it, and we're actually chatting to him about starting up a subject about enterprise architecture. Also, Alan asked, in addition, what about a whole postgrad degree? If things are moving more that way, that's what we're receptive to, I guess.
It's an interesting area to play. And I would certainly support a postgrad degree in it. I think that would be good. I'll probably end up doing it myself. Or at least teaching it, then I don't have to actually do it.
I think if we start running a few short courses in the area and the demand's there, that'll push the outcomes towards us.
And that may well be what we do. We might look at putting together a short taster on an EA course or an ETA course, an Enterprise Technical Architecture course, and look at how do we draw up the roadmap, how do we do this, how do we do that, just sort of give people a feel for it and see if there's interest. Maybe that's the answer to it.
Yeah, I think that is progressing in the background, so you'll hear something about that shortly.
Good.
Excellent. Neil, a couple of questions I think have come in that you might want to field. I don't know if you've seen these. Do you want me to read it out?
Yes, please.
Avinash has just asked, how does CSU compare with AIB's accelerated MBA program? It can be completed in 12 months.
Yes, I don't know too much about that program. I'm saving all the questions and I will answer them personally after. So I'll do some research with the school that does the MBA program, and I will respond to Avinash and everyone else.
Thanks, Neil. If anyone else has a question that you want responded to directly and personally by Neil, you can email him directly, or you can email to that enquiries email address that he posts it up, and it'll go straight to him.
Yeah, I will come back to all these questions. There's some good ones there that I'm not sure of and others that I can answer. So I'll reply to everyone.
Zia has asked, can you tell me more about the scholarship, please, and when the course is going to start? We haven't actually mailed out about that yet. There's two things actually. There's a scholarship application on our main website at the moment for anyone who'd be interested in that. But additionally, there's also a scholarship being offered, I think 3 scholarships to just you students on this course, on this short course, which we're going to send an email out about. You'll be getting that within the next couple of weeks, and you'll be able to apply for this scholarship.
Yeah, I think we'll wait till that goes out and we'll clarify it all for everyone on this short course.
Cool.
Pick me, someone said. I wish I could be that easy. Okay, I'll continue on for a moment, James. I will get to all those questions personally, okay?
Yep, thanks.
One of the most common questions I get is, how do you study by distance education? You're all out there alone, you've got your books, you've got your materials that we send you, but what support will you get? So this is where I think Charles Sturt University really excels. If I can make my PowerPoint slide. Yeah, there we are. So you have the learner in the middle, and you have a study guide that is sent out to you. In that study guide, it tells you week by week what you're going to be studying, when your assignments are due, what they are up front, and when the final exam is, and a whole lot of guide for you throughout the subject. The textbooks are included in the price and are sent all around the world. You should see this place when books go out every session 3 times a year. It's madness, but we'll send the books to you. We have a lot on. You log into CSU's learning system called Interact, and it's there that you have access to the lecturer, to other students, to talk to them, to see notes from your lecturer, and a few other things that I'll mention in a moment. There's a forum which facilitates a lot of that interaction. Your subject coordinator or lecturer will guide you through the session and answer questions as you go through it. Peter's one of our excellent subject coordinators at the university. We do a lot of exam practice tests for you before you do the actual final exam, so it's no shock as far as the structure and how it's all set up. So you will have practice. And we also have online lectures using this format that you're on now, and this is why we started these short courses, so you can experience distance education. Now this is a very academic subject, Peter will answer questions, but he's pushing a lot of information to you. There is also a lot of subjects with very practical labs, and I think you'll find it very interactive. So we think this whole model has worked very well in guiding people out there. A lot of people also form little study groups either by phone with people on their subject or in their local area if they can, which they find on the forum that other people are doing the subject.
If I can,
yeah.
Sorry, go on to say that. I'll put some order at the end there.
Okay, so the study load for a course, we say it's about 10 to 12 hours per subject per week. So if you're going to do postgraduate study, there's no getting away from that. You must find the time. If you're a part-time student and you're working, which means generally you're working full-time, about half of our students take 1 subject a session. Some take 2. So depending on 1 or 2, that's 10 to 12 or 20 to 24 hours a week you've got to find. There's no hiding that fact. You find it late at night, weekends, you work with your family, but you must find that time. But you can also take leave in a session if things get too hard or you're travelling. But that's the workload that's expected of you, and you can just see in Peter's course how much content there is in a subject and how much you'll learn, but also how much you have to study. You right there, Peter? Did you want to say something?
Okay, I'll just throw in here. I've done now 3 degrees through CSU, all by distance ed. I did my bachelor's degree when I decided some years ago it's time having been a self-taught IT guru, It was time I actually got some qualifications, so I did the Bachelor of Information Technology in Information Systems at CSU in Bathurst. I then went and got my Masters, and then finally did my doctorate. I did all three by distance ed. So I know what the distance ed system works like, and now I'm teaching it, so I know how that works from both sides. It's a great system. It does, as Neil said, take a lot of time, and you've got to be prepared to put that time into it. However, there is an awful lot of support. You get a lot of support from your lecturer. You get a lot of support from your study mates, the other guys in the course with you. We run a forum, a discussion forum on there, and in the ITC 561 forum, which is this course, the full course, I think there's some hundreds of comments and questions that have been thrown up on the forum where a student has asked a question and other people have dived in and answered it. I might have dropped in and put something else on it, which has fired something else up, and off it's gone. So you'll find that it actually works and works extremely well, and a lot of people get quite a lot of information. We tend to move away from, as we did on this forum, away from the strict topic that we're talking about, but we'll cover all sorts of peripheral topics around it. As far as the study material goes, on Interact, on the full version of this, you will get a topic for each week. The topic will give you the readings that you've got to do out of the textbook, and in my case I'll always give you some additional readings from research or from practitioner material that I recommend you read. It will give you a video or two to look at. It will then take you into some content, and I'll talk about the things that are really important, the topics and the ideas that I want you to try and come out of the week with. Then we'll do an online lecture. And I tend to run my lectures a little bit different to the one we've been running here. I will run 3/4 of the lecture period as a lecture, and then we'll turn it into a question time seminar, sort of let's talk about it type arrangement. And so the idea is that you've gone through this, and I appreciate it's a little bit more difficult trying to do it online than it is in a lecture theatre, but having gone through the process of listening to the lecture and getting everything, now you've got the chance to ask the questions. And sometimes what I'll do as well is throw a problem at you and say, now how are you going to solve this problem? How would we do that, bearing in mind all the information we've just gone through in the lecture? And so that's the sort of process that works. I still remember that when I did my master's degree, I think I did every single assignment except the last one out of a hotel room because I was travelling for work at the same time. So it can be done, guys. It's just a matter of how determined are you to get there and how you manage yourself. So you need to have a little bit of project management skills and a little bit of determination. And if you can do that, you'll get there, you'll get anywhere you want. And I'd be quite happy to see you on the Doctorate of Information Technology course, where we can start to talk you into getting your own doctorate. So something to aim for. Neil, back to you, mate.
Thanks, Peter. Valuable input from a great lecturer.
Thank you.
Okay, so people who, are they eligible? So most people think if you've got a degree or a postgraduate qualification, that should say qualification, not study, you would get into a master's, and that's generally correct. But also you can get in without a degree or postgraduate qualification if you have the correct experience. And that's not too mind-boggling. The experience would be for a Masters of Information Security Specialist would be 3 years IT experience. Same for the Networking Masters would be 3 years, and the Mobile Apps degree. So 3 years IT experience is not, and most of you would have that. Also, on the Masters of Management, would need 5 years business experience, not just IT. So they're not daunting amounts of experience to get into a Masters. And I talk to so many students, potential students, and most of them are eligible. Very few, or the ones that are not, will be eligible pretty soon in a year or so. So it's not hard to get into a Masters. We have 3 sessions a year. July is the next one, and it goes for about 16 weeks till the 30th of October. That closes in the month before, in June. Then we have a Christmas one that goes November to February. We do give you a week off at Christmas. We're very generous. And then a February to June one, another 16-week one. So there's 3 sessions a year. And with that program, you could do a master's with no credits in 2 years, doing 2, 2 and 2 for 2 years, or you'd stretch it out to 4 if you only did one subject a session, or a mixture because you determine each session what you do. So that's the time frame you're looking at to do a master's. We do give credit for a couple of ways, from industry exams, certifications, that matches the course content. For example, CISP or MCSA from Microsoft. There's many different ones and so many certifications around. Or if you've done postgraduate study before, you know, might have done a master's or a graduate diploma or certificate, and if there's a match of the content, we can give you up to half of the course in credit. And I spend a lot of my time doing that, checking what people can get. And you can also get credits. You don't need them when you start. As long as you get them before graduation, you're fine. And we do have a list on our site of all the exams, all the certifications that do give credit. And we're getting more and more all the time. We go through an assessment process, so if they're not listed there, we can look at yours and say, yes, that would meet the requirements for a credit on a subject. I'll just have a quick look on some of the... What is the URL for that page, Richard? Yes, I'll send that out to everyone. Blah, 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 yep. I think most of those I'll cover separately. There are fees for any masters, any program in Australia, and our fees are, I'd say they're about mid-range, but they do include industry practical experience, which I think is our great advantage, and also our great distance education process. So it gets all your materials. If it relates to your job or future prospects in a job, it's tax deductible. Interest-free loans to all Australian citizens, that's called fee help. Even if you take out the interest-free loan, what you debit to that loan is still a tax deduction, and you'd need to check all this with your accountant, of course. And does cost, we bill you each session, so up front if you're doing one subject every 3 months, you'll be charged, get an invoice for that cost of $2,700 per subject for Australian citizens. And if you debit it we also debit your interest-free loan, that amount every session for the number of subjects you do. So there's no upfront payment or anything. Any questions, please come to me. If you get that inquiries at itmasters.edu.au, that's pretty easy to remember. Shoot me an email and I'll get back to you. That's all I do all day is talk by phone, email, overseas calls, and I just love it. You can also call me from Australia, free call on that number, or overseas from that number on there. So please come and talk to me. I've got so many people starting their course, never done uni before, got them through the master's level, and a few of the people I got started are now doing their doctorate, which is a different thing altogether, a massive amount of work. You don't have to go to that level. You can just do a graduate certificate or get a master's, and I can help you through it. We also have a question. Just one last slide. We have a questionnaire on our itmasters.edu.au address. You can fill in your details there, what experience you have, if you've got any certifications or qualifications for credit. I'll respond to you with a detailed email. Then you can phone me or email me. We'll go between us till you're satisfied or got all the answers that you want. So fill that in, or give me a call or email me. I'm very approachable. And I think that's all I have to say.
And Neil, I'll just throw one other thing in there. If anybody's interested in going on to do a doctorate, drop a line to Neil, and Neil, if you please forward it on to me, I'll correspond with them directly and let them know exactly what they're letting themselves in for.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a great group up there, Tanvir and Peter. So yes, it'll be fantastic to see some of our doctoral students come through. Thank you everyone for your time, and have a good night or day.
Thank you, Neil. I actually had a question a while back that I'll probably field myself, if that's all right. Sean's just asked, and this is a follow-up question from about a week earlier, in the Learn.IT Masters system, you might all find that when you log in, it says you have quizzes that are due. And you've probably already done all those quizzes that are due, but it continues to say that afterwards. I promised I'd look into this. I did look into it, and we found that it's quite simply a bug in the Moodle system. Now, Moodle is the learning management system that runs on our website. It's a great piece of open source software that we use, free open source software that we run that site on. Takes a great deal of pressure off us. It does most of it quite automatically. I went into their bug tracker and found that it's been reported as a bug, but that no one's actioned it because it's supported entirely by volunteers, programmers and such. So I've actually set aside a bit of my own time inside and outside of work. I'm going to be working on that one myself. We feel that if we're making such good use of open source software, we should be giving back to the community. It's other universities all around the world that it's mostly geeks who work at these universities that contribute so much to it. So that should be good. So perhaps if you see that that's gone in a future short course, that could be due to this work. Richard's just said, James, I'll give you a hand. That'd be good. Thanks. We could work on it together and contribute via Git. I'll talk to you about that offline. So that's all from me. Is that are we all done for tonight, Peter?
I think so, James. It's been enjoyable. As I said before, thank you very much, guys. You've really made this course with the questions and the quality of the questions that you've raised. The course is nothing without you guys, and thank you very much for attending and for being such interesting people and raising such damn fine questions.
I couldn't agree more.